Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Inside Israel. I'm Joel Chasnoff, coming to you from Israel, though not for long. In about 5 hours, I'm leaving for the airport for the next leg of my spring tour, actually, the final leg of the spring tour. And then I'm back in Israel for the entire summer, which is going to change the timing for these live recordings. I'll get to that at the end. It'll be posted on the website. But for now, it is 4 a.m. here in Ra'anana, just outside Tel Aviv, and a lot of interesting stuff to talk about this week. This has been a very heavy news week, and we are still in the thick of it. It's June 5th, 2024. Tonight's episode is called Back to the Wall. And the reason is because right now, the Israeli government, and especially our Prime Minister Netanyahu, they are backed into a corner in a few different ways. Not necessarily bad ways, ways that will force them, I think, to act, or at least should. But I want to talk about what these situations are and why the onus, the pressure is on us at this point to take some sort of decisive action, which I'm not exaggerating, I feel could change the course of Israel for the next 100 years, longer, depending on which decisions are made. And this also gets to the question of what does true leadership mean? Means making the hard decisions. Leadership means making the hard decisions, the unpopular decisions, but the ones that will ultimately lead to the long-term health and viability of the country. And we're going to see, I think, this week, maybe the week after, if our leaders have the cojones, the balls, to do that. Let's start with situation number one, the hostage deal. There is supposedly this hostage deal on the table right now, and a lot of news swirling around about whose deal it is and how much of it is actually true to what Israel originally put forward. But the headline is that Israel proposed a hostage deal, which is basically a cut and paste of what Hamas had asked for earlier, offering a lot to Hamas, including a pathway to the eventual end of conflict. And Biden went on television, went public with this, made an address saying that Israel's proposal is now on the table and that the onus is on Hamas to accept this deal, made very clear. Biden and his helpers, other officials in the State Department, Secretary of State, they made clear that right now, if there is no deal, it is Hamas's fault. So they really did try to communicate that if a ceasefire is what's wanted by Hamas, they have the opportunity right now to get that. And I gotta say, I applaud Biden for doing that, for trying to make clear that Israel has done everything it can to have the ceasefire that the world is calling for. People who hate Israel are ignoring it. They are still protesting Israel anyway. We would expect that. But the Biden administration has made clear that the onus is on Hamas to accept this deal if indeed they want a ceasefire like they claim. So why is Israel backed into a corner? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, Netanyahu knows that if indeed he goes forward with this hostage deal, his government will fall. Already, by the way, I'm pausing right now. I'm hearing fighter jets outside my apartment. It's one of the aspects of living in Israel these past few months. You hear fighter jets, you know stuff's going on not so far away, either in Gaza or in Lebanon. But Biden knows that two parties in his government, Ben-Gvir's party and Smotrich's party, both far right and religious, will leave the government if this hostage deal is made. Now, why is that? Are they against hostages being released? No, that's not the reason why. It's because they don't want the war to end. Not only do they not want the war to end, their vision is that Israel will take over Gaza, will reconquer Gaza, make Gaza part of Israel again. And I think Netanyahu knows that he can't do that. Most Israelis don't want that. The world certainly doesn't want that. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir want that, and they'll leave the government if there's any type of agreement that does not lead to Israel taking over Gaza. So that's number one. That's the first point that Netanyahu has to contend with. But why is he really backed into a corner? I think Netanyahu knows right now that if there's ever going to be a deal, this is it. And if he says no to this deal, he's going to go down in history as the leader who had a chance to get the remaining hostages back, but didn't. And I've been saying this to the people I've been talking to about here. Years from now, when we look back on this historical moment, if there is not a hostage deal, it won't be because the circumstances were not right or because we didn't have an opportunity. It's because we did not accept it. We turned it down and we left our hostages in Gaza of our own choice. What Netanyahu should do, in my opinion, is come out strongly and publicly and say, we want this deal to happen. Go ahead, Hamas. The ball is in your court. Netanyahu is not doing that. Instead, he's been accused from one of his negotiators within the war cabinet, an anonymous official, of sabotaging the hostage deal within the past few days. And I agree with this. All of this talk from Netanyahu is saying the war will continue until Hamas is destroyed. We are going to go after Hamas until every last militant is found. What he's basically saying is the war is going to end. We're not going to stop fighting. There is no ceasefire. And he's communicating that the war in Gaza will go on forever. And that's sort of giving an out to Hamas to turn down the deal. What Netanyahu should be doing instead is coming out very vocally saying that Israel will support it. Now, in terms of Biden, I think has been very smart here in a couple of ways. First of all, he made his announcement on a Friday. I think it was either just before Shabbat here in Israel or right after Shabbat had come in. And a lot of people have accused Biden of doing this on Shabbat so that Netanyahu couldn't respond. But there are others, and I actually think this is correct. There are others who believe that Biden was actually giving Netanyahu a little gift in making his announcement on Shabbat, just prior to Shabbat, because it allowed Netanyahu 24 hours of breathing room where he didn't really have to respond, where he didn't have to make a statement. He could say, because it's Shabbat, I am not going to make, he could ignore it, not ignore it, but think it over for 24 hours without being forced to have to respond. So that's one little gift that I think Biden gave to Netanyahu. The other thing Biden has done very well, I think, is he's really making Israel look like the hero here. Specifically, he's making Netanyahu look like the hero. He's saying that Bibi will do anything he can to bring the hostages home, that this is an Israeli proposal that Israel wrote, and that right now the onus is on Hamas to accept the deal. Now, in his interview with Time, Biden also said that Netanyahu, it's understandable why people would think that he's operating for political reasons. I'm not sure he needed to say that in the interview, but in other ways, in terms of the deal itself, he's really trying to make it seem like Israel has already agreed. And I think it's one of those situations where if you just say it enough and get the word out there enough that Israel has already agreed to this deal, Israel will have to live up to it. And that is why Israel, in a way, is backed into a corner. To not accept this deal would be to say, no, we actually did not propose these amazing things. No, we actually did not write this deal. Biden is wrong. And Netanyahu is, to an extent, saying it. But I think Israel has a real opportunity here. The Israeli public really does believe that Israel has an opportunity here. And I think we'll have to see. Netanyahu is going to drag his heels, I think, as much as he can. But ultimately, within the next week to 10 days, I think some sort of decision has had to be made. I know we have negotiators in Cairo right now, and theoretically, Hamas would approve this, is positive toward it. So if it comes down to Israel having to decide, I hope to do the right thing and bring the hostages home. And look, if we end the war, if there's a ceasefire and we pull all of our troops out of Gaza and Hamas attacks us even one time again with even one rocket, we now have full permission to go back in and start the war. And in a way, it could be a good thing if we end this war and then Hamas attacks us with one more rocket down the road, because that would allow Israel to go ahead and finish the war. And also the entire world will be watching. So this whole idea that Hamas needs to be completely dismantled so it can never attack Israel again. First of all, that's not going to happen. But second of all, uh, it can be an invitation to us to 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 fight more if Hamas does attack again. We need to make sure our border is strong, that they can't come over by land or by air or by sea, which they did last time, or by tunnel. But the world is watching as well. And if there is some sort of agreement and Hamas breaks it, it'll be on them. All eyes will be on them. So that's the first way that Israel is right now backed into a corner. The second, I don't know how much attention this is getting in the American media, but it's the war in the north. Hezbollah is attacking Israel in the north. And then under any other circumstances, Israel would have already fought back. I mean, these are not small attacks. This is not a few stray bullets being fired over the border from Lebanon into Israeli territory. Let's not mince words here. Hezbollah is bombing northern Israel and causing huge fires because pieces from the bombs, which are typically the drones, which are typically blown up, this shrapnel falls with sparks. It ignites trees, which are dry, all the foliage dry in the hot summer weather. And we're having these huge fires in Israel. The north is on fire. And Israel really is doing nothing, or at least that's how it looks to the Israeli public. Now, from some of my army contacts, I've heard that we're actually doing a lot, that we're undermining Hezbollah assets in Lebanon, that we're going after them in Syria. And that's why Hezbollah keeps responding with such strength, because they're countering our attacks. But at some point, Israel's back is against the wall when it comes to the north. At some point, we need to respond to Hezbollah. In 1982, Israel went into Lebanon to stop the PLO from attacking Israel. And we set up a buffer zone, a security zone, a number of miles into South Lebanon, occupied by Israeli troops. And the whole point was to keep Hezbollah and to keep other bad actors away from the border with Israel. We set up a buffer zone in South Lebanon. Well, we've set up a buffer zone this time too. The only difference is the buffer zone is in our own country. We've evacuated all of our people. We've made the north of Israel an essentially no man's land territory. So yeah, we've got a security zone. We've got a buffer zone against Lebanon, except it's in Israel. And what kind of country is that? What kind of life is it when you have to evacuate your own citizens from the territory, your own territory, and put them in hotels and with other citizens, and instead evacuate the northern part of your country so that people will not be attacked? That is not a life. This is already 8 months that people have been living in hotels outside of their homes, from Kiryat Shmona, Metula, all these other northern towns and moshavim. Sooner or later, Israel needs to stop Hezbollah. And what I am hearing is that we are waiting for the operation in Rafah to finish. We are waiting for a possible hostage deal to be firmed up. And then we will go all out on Hezbollah. That is what I am hearing. But even Israeli officials are saying as much. Benny Gantz, who's in the war cabinet, former chief of staff, said that by the end of summer, this will all be resolved. Halevi, the chief of staff, said that we are ready to attack and we will make a decision soon, that we are prepared. Netanyahu is saying we have the means now to stop Hezbollah. But the entire country is watching, and we'll get to this in a minute when I talk about what Israelis are saying amongst ourselves. This is not a life. This is not normal to be attacked from a foreign country, and instead of attacking back, we simply withdraw and evacuate our own citizenry. Statistically, the government has approved that 350,000 reservists can now be called up for service. I think typically at any time we have 100,000 or so reservists active, and that number has been increased to 350,000. And the ones we are talking to, and the ones, Dorit is very active in helping to support soldiers, through her work, the ones she's talking to, many are being drafted right now and given dates to report to reserves. So something is going down. Something must be happening soon, because this is not a viable way to exist. But that is the second way that Israel's back is to the wall. The third has to do with the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim. This past week, the Israeli government went before the Supreme Court, the High Court in Israel, and made its case for why the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, are not being drafted. As I've mentioned before on this podcast, last year, 2023, 66,000 ultra-Orthodox Haredim young men were given exemptions from serving in the army. And this while, as I just mentioned, the number of reserves has been increased to 350,000. They are not participating in this, the ultra-Orthodox Haredim. They are not being drafted. Meanwhile, soldiers who spent months in Gaza are now being told that they are going to spend possibly months on the northern border, maybe even in Lebanon itself. The burden is being bared by a segment of the population, but not the entire population. And this cannot continue. Everyone sees how unfair it is. I know that Netanyahu himself, if he could draft the Haredim, he would. He knows it's the right thing to do. But politically, again, it would spell his end, which is why he's simply not acting on it and trying to come up with all these bogus reasons and bogus implementations and clauses for how to avoid it. But he is scared. He is scared of his government falling, and that is why he's continued to put off the draft of the ultra-Orthodox. But again, our government's back is to the wall. The Israeli public simply will not tolerate that this segment of the population, 13% of the Israeli population, is not doing their fair share of the job to protect the country, to die for the country, to put their lives on their line. So those are three areas in which I truly feel that Israel's back is to the wall. And these next 10 days to 2 weeks are going to be critical in determining not only what happens by the end of the summer, but really, I think, Israel possibly for the next 100 years, depending on how we act on ultra-Orthodox being drafted, what happens with the war with Hezbollah in the north, and what happens in terms of a deal to bring our hostages home. So in terms of what Israelis are talking about right now, it really is, number one, the war in the north and what's happening in the north. Israelis are just aghast. The thing you hear over and over is, Eifo hatzava shelanu? Where is our army? How are we allowing this to happen? What normal country in the world gets attacked, has its forests set on fire, has people injured and killed by incoming bombs, drones, missiles, mortars, and doesn't do anything and doesn't destroy the enemy? And you can think of logical reasons for why we would wait for the Rafah operation to end, to wait for a hostage deal to go through. But on the surface, Israelis cannot believe it. And everyone is saying, Ma korepo, what is happening here? So that is really the number one thing that Israelis are talking about. What's up with the north? And Israelis are preparing, buying water, putting together their war kits. I mean, I've been saying this before. A lot of Israelis have had this ready for a while, buying generators and such. But we really do believe at this point it needs to be just around the corner, probably mid-June. The second thing Israelis are talking about is this hostage deal. We had 4 hostages this week declared dead. Now, these are not and recently we've had other supposed hostages. It was announced that actually they were killed on October 7th in Israel and their bodies were identified. But this week, we had 4 hostages who we know were held in Gaza. They appeared on video. And they were also, in many ways, very recognizable faces. These were 3 men in their 80s and another man in his 50s. And they represented, the 3, at least in their 80s, represented really the eldest of the hostage population. I'm talking, of course, about Chaim Perry, Yoram Metzger, and Amiram Cooper, who are all in their 80s, and Nadav Popplewell, who was 51. 3 of them appeared in Hamas propaganda videos over the past few months. We know for a fact that they were in Gaza, and they were declared dead earlier this week. And this really drove home the message to the Israeli public that time is running out. Any hostages who are still alive, if we don't act soon, we will lose them. So we must do what we can to bring them home. And the children of these hostages are speaking out. You know, the son of Yoram Metzger said that he doesn't want any soldiers to endanger their own lives to bring home his father's body. He said, sadly, my father is already dead. I don't want soldiers to die to bring home a body that will not have life again. Other children of the hostages are really calling out Netanyahu and saying that he has not been doing enough, saying that he's missed opportunities and hasn't made it a priority to bring the hostages home. So the declared death of these 4 hostages has really been a big story for us Israelis here. And by the way, I want to point out that these 2 very religious parties, United Torah Judaism and Shas, who are part of Netanyahu's coalition, they have said that they will back a hostage deal for the reason of pidyon shvuim. Pidyon shvuim is Hebrew for redemption of the captives. Many believe, Maimonides himself believed, that redemption of the captives is the highest mitzvah in Judaism, the highest commandment. And so they are saying they would back a hostage deal. So this is all the more reason why there's pressure on Netanyahu to move forward. The last piece of news might not have gotten a lot of play in the US, but it's a big deal here. It happened just yesterday. We had the Jerusalem Day March, very contentious. A lot of anti-Arab rhetoric, a lot of chances of death to the Arabs. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the right-wing minister, said that the Temple Mount is open to Jews to pray on. Netanyahu immediately came back and said, no, the Israeli policy toward prayer on the Temple Mount has not changed. But this sort of reminds Israelis that not all the conflict is from our outside enemies. Not all of our conflict comes from Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, enemies in the West Bank and Middle East. That some of our biggest conflict comes from within Israel itself, namely when it comes to those marching in this Jerusalem Day parade. I heard that journalists were beaten up. I have to look into that story further, but certainly these really, really anti-Arabic chants and some violence, and it shows you that there's a segment of the population that is not interested in peace at all. And if Israel does pursue peace, 2-state solution, even a hostage deal, you are going to see conflict within Israel itself and within Israeli society itself, the Jewish population. So that is a big story here amongst Israelis, is our own extreme Jews. What are they going to the country, and to what extent are they going to dictate Israeli policy down the road? And by the way, Itamar Ben-Gvir has already announced that he's no longer going to vote with the coalition, that his party will not vote with the coalition as long as Netanyahu does not reveal details of this hostage deal that currently is on the table. So already we are seeing signs that the government might be falling apart. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we are starting to see some signs and some cracks. But I've always said that the contentions within Israeli society are just as important, if not more, as those threats from our outside enemies. Okay, let's get on to our questions for this week. Bill in San Antonio writes, what is this about the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs hiring Stoic to mount fake social media campaigns to influence American legislators in support of the war in Gaza? This was an annoying question, but a great question. Annoying because I had no knowledge of this at all, which means I had to go look it up and research it, but great because I learned a lot. So thank you, Bill, for sending this in. It turns out there is an Israeli company called Stoic, and they specialize in dark social media. What that means is in this case, they were able to set up fake social media accounts, and from these fake social media accounts, they were able to put out content supposedly meant to influence American lawmakers immediately after October 7th to support Israeli action in Gaza. And the Israeli government supposedly paid $2 million to this country to do it. So this is not fake news. This is a real story. And I gotta say, this is not the first time that we've heard about Israeli companies doing this stuff. You know, we talk a lot about Startup Nation. But there's a dark side to Startup Nation, which is all these Israeli companies that are involved in spyware and spying on other countries and tapping the phones of foreign leaders and ways to bust into the iPhones and other private domains of government officials and everyday citizens alike. And this is another example of an Israeli company that really sort of operates in the darker side of the web. But yeah, Bill, it is true. The Israeli government paid $2 million to this company to create fake social media accounts and try to promote the idea of a war in Gaza. How successful was it? I'm not sure. I don't know how many lawmakers are really influenced by social media, perhaps the younger people on their staff. I personally believe that the reason Israel doesn't have the support it needs really doesn't have to do that much with social media messaging. It has more to do with just the narrative that we've put out or failed to put out for the past certainly 20 years, but you could even say 50 or 75 years. And it's not necessarily social media. But once again, it's the Israeli government fumbling and not really handling publicity the way it should. My friend Nora in Connecticut writes, here's a question for tonight. Is the general or apparent indifference of Western countries toward the citizenship status of some of the Israeli hostages who are British, American, German, French, etc., how do I feel about that? And she says that she herself is from Colombia, applying for citizenship to the United States right now, and this has her concerned. Nora, thank you for the question. I agree. I would be concerned as well. America and these other countries really have not shown that much concern for the fact that their own citizens are being held by Hamas. I've said before that it could be ordinary ordinary American or other country citizens who are taken captive by Middle Eastern Islamic fundamentalist groups down the road. Not just Jews, not just Israelis. And so everyone should be quaking in their boots and watching how these governments react. And the fact that these governments don't really seem to care at all, I think, is a very bad sign. It would certainly make me scared if I were living in America, that their own governments really don't seem to be doing all that much for their own benefit to get them out. It seems like they're putting all the burden on Israel without really putting their own skin in the game to get their own citizens out of hell in Gaza. So, Nora, I agree with you. And I wish I had better news on that front. Question number 3, this is from Karen in Illinois. She says, I know you've discussed settlements in the West Bank. I don't recall if you've said how many Israelis currently live in the West Bank, and I assume you mean Jewish Israelis. How many is it, and what is the security situation there? There's really no exact number, Karen. Thank you for the question, but it's been estimated that about 500,000, 500,000 Jews live in the West Bank and another 200,000 in East Jerusalem. But talking about the West Bank, that includes the hilltop youth living on illegal outposts, but it also includes towns like Efrat, which are very established Jewish towns and centers at this point. Efrat is where Rabbi Riskin has his yeshiva. And the idea that Jews would evacuate Efrat, I don't think is really on the table. So any sort of two-state solution would mean that we do a land swap, that we provide land from Israeli territory where no people are living. We make that part of any deal and give it to the Palestinian side in exchange for us continuing to live in towns like Efrat, Ariel, and others that are much more established. But as for your question itself, the exact number is about 500,000 in the West Bank, Karen. So thank you for asking. And this, again, is one of the biggest questions Israel's going to have to face is for our own long-term viability. How long do we keep on going protecting them? It takes a lot of manpower, a lot of soldiers to protect our Jewish citizens in the West Bank. One of the reasons October 7th was able to happen is that we had so many of our forces outside the West Bank and so few down south in Gaza that Hamas was able to attack. They were given this opening. So the idea, it's not just about theoretical ideas and what's fair and land for peace. It really is a manpower and a security question. Do we want to keep sending in our children to protect these people who have decided they want to live in the West Bank? Now, Hebron, that has, historical Jewish roots, but I think Yossi Klein Halevi is the one who said this, that peace is about compromise on both sides, that the Arab side is going to have to give up the right of return, the idea that anyone descendant from a Palestinian who was here in 1948 would automatically be able to be allowed to return, that they have to give that up, but we have to make some concessions too. And one of the concessions we might need to make is giving up our claim to some of these towns, like Hebron? Is it more important that we hold on to this center or that we have some sort of separation, we can have peace and have Israeli security stronger overall? I say we give up a place like Hebron in exchange for the long-term health and strength of Israel. That wraps up tonight's podcast. It is a little bit of a short one. As I said, in a few hours, I'm off to the airport. So that is why this was a little bit on the shorter end. But I hope you found it informative. Since I do have a couple more minutes, I will run through some of your questions in the chat. Someone asked if Pride is underway here in Israel. Yes, it is Pride Month. I don't know if the Pride Parade is happening in Israel this year. I should look that up. We already had a Pride March in Jerusalem last week, led by hostage families. I don't think that was a good idea. I think the more we mix the hostage cause with progressive causes or really any other causes, the more it sort of taints the whole hostage narrative. This should be non-political. I understand why they marched at the head of that parade, but it really, I think it's a mistake. I think can turn people against it who might not be. And I'm talking about a hostage deal. But just so you do know, in general, Israel has the largest pride parade in the Middle East and the second, I think the second largest in all of Asia. The biggest one is in Bangkok, Thailand. So Israel is, and Tel Aviv itself has really tried to brand itself as a gay-friendly city. And the Pride Parade, I've gone before, is huge and a big celebration. Pride Month is underway here. You do see rainbow flags. I don't know if the parade is happening. According to CNN, the date for Netanyahu to address Congress is still uncertain. Yes, the original date for Netanyahu to address Congress was Shavuot. So that date is being changed. Okay, that wraps it up for today's broadcast. Again, thank you so much for joining me. And as always, I'm just going to put joelchasnoff.com/podcast in the chat. That is where you can get the links to the live broadcasts. That is where you can get the links to Apple and Spotify. Now, a very big announcement. From this point on, moving forward, these live broadcasts are moving to Sundays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So our next broadcast is going to be the 16th of June. That's a Sunday, the 16th of June at 5 p.m. Eastern. The reason is these 4 a.m. wake-ups are really just not viable anymore. I think they were really important when the war just began to give you cutting-edge news at the best time of day when you could join. But now, for my own sake, I have to stop doing the 4 a.m.ers. And this summer, I'm going to be in Israel the entire summer. And so we're moving to midnight my time, which is 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays. If you can't make it, that is a great opportunity for you to listen on Spotify or listen on Apple Podcasts. Those links, again, are on my website. And I still hope you can join in for the live broadcast. You can get those links there by signing up for Hebrew is Magic, which is my newsletter. Continue to email me your questions. Your questions are what always keeps this fresh and on the ball. I really look forward to hearing from you. Send feedback as well. And if you have a chance to give a rating to the podcast, please do. That always helps. I'm off to New York in a few hours for about a week, and then we'll be coming back to you from Israel in about 9 days. Until then, Lahitraot, thank you so much for joining. I'm Joel Chasnoff. I'll keep the chat open for another minute so you can hang out. Laila Tov, everyone.